Those of us with even a passing knowledge of Canadian history will have no problem naming Sir John A. Macdonald as the country's first prime minister. Most of those same people will also be able to tell you that Sir Wilfrid Laurier was Canada's first French-Canadian prime minister. And if they can't do that, then they'll no doubt recognize his face from the $5 bill. But not as much is known about the four men who held the office in the 5 years between Macdonald and Laurier. Now the author of the new book, The Lost Prime Ministers, hopes to change that. Welcome to the City News Bookshelf, Michael Hill.
Thanks, John.
First off, easy question. What made you write the book?
That's not so easy. I knew there was this gap in our literature about Canadian political history. There wasn't much known about these guys. And when I talked to other people, and I used to be a history teacher as well, people didn't know much about those. The fact that we had 6 prime ministers in the space of 5 years. I mean, imagine if that were to happen today, it would be, they think that we were a banana republic or something. And that wasn't the case at all.
Yeah.
I thought, I'm sorry, to answer your question I just thought it filled a gap in our literature. And my publisher, thankfully, agreed with me about that.
As you say, an unbelievable amount of turnover, not seen before or since. What was the reason behind this revolving door of PMs, this, as you call it in the book, this deluge of caretakers?
Yeah, it was a lot of just poor circumstance, I guess you'd say. The first guy to take over was a man named John Abbott, who was about 70 years old at the time. And when John A. Macdonald died, he was like the least painful choice that they picked. He didn't even want the job. He was very reluctant, but he took the job on. But then within a year, he started to suffer dizziness and spells, and it turned out that he had a brain tumor, and he died shortly after. So he had to pass it on to a young guy named John Thompson. And Thompson was very capable. He was sort of like, I compare him to Pierre Trudeau. He was the smartest man in the room among the politicians of the day. And he was only 47, I think, when he became prime minister. And unfortunately, he was what we would now call a junk food addict. And he was very overweight. And, people didn't know much about heart disease in those days. And he went to London, England, to be inducted into the Queen Victoria's Privy Council, and died of a heart attack, a sudden massive heart attack, in front of the Queen. She was very, very upset about that. And then so he had obviously not groomed a successor. So they picked the most senior cabinet minister at the time, who was Mackenzie Bowell. But Bowell was not a leader whatsoever. And he was saddled with something called the Manitoba Schools Question, and just didn't know how to handle it. And his cabinet actually revolted on him. 7 of the 15 members quit in January of 1896. So he couldn't find anyone to replace them, and finally kind of gave in and gave the job to Charles Tupper. And Tupper had been around since the 1860s. He was one of the original fathers of Confederation. He was the guy who sold it to Nova Scotia, basically. But Tupper sort of came in with only a few weeks before the 1896 election, and unfortunately, I think the public was a little tired of the Conservatives, who had been in power for so many years, and they liked Laurier, and they liked what Laurier was presenting. And so Tupper was only prime minister for something like 6 weeks, and and that was the end of the Conservative reign for quite a few years.
Now, these 4, of course, set the stage for Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who is far from a lost prime minister. How do you think they set the table for him? I guess in one respect, he had something that they didn't, and that was party unity behind him.
Yes, the Liberals had really got their act together. They had a big conference in 1893 where they kind of laid out what their policies were going to be, and that was kind of a radical approach in the 1890s. Whereas the Conservatives were campaigning on the old policy, the old leader, and just it was like almost a foregone conclusion that the Liberals would win the 1896 election. Plus, Laurier sort of had a charisma about him, much like the Trudeaus and people like that. So I think that really helped as well.
Were there any big surprises or aha moments during your research and writing of the lost prime ministers?
Well, I think the big takeaway that I took, that what really surprised me, was how these men were outstanding in their fields. Even if they had never become prime minister, I think they would have ranked as among the top Canadians of the second half of the century. Abbott was so interesting. He was a lawyer. He was a businessman. He bought and sold railways like you and I would buy and sell cars. He was a musician. He was a philanthropist, involved in just so many things in Montreal. And I don't know how he did it all. Thompson was, a leader in the law, not only when he came to Ottawa, but he had been for many years in Nova Scotia. He was on the Supreme Court there, and so he was, and like I said, he was the smartest guy in the room. Bowell, even though he wasn't much of a political leader, he was an outstanding newspaper man, and that's back in the day when newspapers really meant something. That was the media. He helped to start the Associated Press, and had a great reputation as a newspaper man. And then Tupper was an outstanding doctor, especially in the sort of a new field of obstetrics back in the day, back in the 1860s even. So they were all amazing men, even if they hadn't become prime ministers.
Now, all of them with the unenviable task of following Sir John A. Macdonald. The book opens with a scene-setting chapter on Macdonald. Besides his role in the Pacific scandal, his handling of the Riel Rebellion, he's viewed mostly in a flattering light by historians until recently. How do you think that the revelations about the residential school system changed the way we look at Sir John A. and his legacy?
Oh, geez, that's like that's like touching a hot wire. Yeah, he has become a figure of controversy, and it's really too bad in a way, because every prime minister up to Jean Chrétien can take some blame for continuing the residential schools. And it's really difficult to judge historical figures based on our present day attitudes. I think we have to really be careful about that. I wanted to get into that in the book a little bit, but my editor thought it was best to steer away from that kind of controversy. I think what we can basically say is that, for his time, he was not, his attitudes and what he did was not considered the evil thing that we see it as nowadays.
I guess the best we can do is present the good and the bad, and then leave it up to the reader.
That's right. Yeah. Like, I think he did so much good in so many other ways. It's too bad that, and there are also some unknown things that never get mentioned too about Macdonald when it comes to his relationship with Aboriginal people. Was, during the 1870 rebellion, or in the aftermath of it, and the same thing with the second Riel Rebellion in 1885. He spoke with representatives from the Aboriginal people, and he wanted to know, what were your concerns, what could have been done differently. He made a point of speaking to them, and he also advocated for the vote for Aboriginal men. I mean, of course, in a time when women did not have the vote, he was in favor of giving Aboriginal men the vote, which, you know, again, was very radical for its day, and very much a positive thing, I think, when you look at it.
What do you hope people will take away from the book?
I think I tried to tell it just as a basic, straightforward chronological story almost. It's just I would like people to be aware of these men. It's something I think we need as citizens. We need to understand our history, and these guys were a brief and shining moment in our history. They didn't accomplish anything long lasting, I guess you could say, but they were interesting people. And I think when you look at politicians from the past and what motivated them and what kinds of things they did, it maybe helps us to understand a little bit about what politicians nowadays are trying to do. Like I often think we demonize our present day politicians too much, and I think if we look at them in the same light as we look at historical figures, maybe we'll have a better attitude towards our political system.
Maybe
does that make sense?
Yeah, of course, and maybe in more human terms than we usually allow ourselves or give ourselves a little bit more grace than we do to our current politicians, I guess you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. The name of the book is The Lost Prime Ministers, Macdonald's Successors, Abbott, Thompson, Bowell, and Tupper. It's available from Dundurn Press. My thanks to author Michael Hill.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed it.